So first reading, which was reading number 6, was about time value of money, in which we discussed calculating future value and calculating present value of a fixed cash flow. And we also discussed present and future values of annuity. And we also discussed differences between SAR and EAR. So those were the core topics or core primary topics in the time value of money. This reading is also very much similar to previous reading. Why? Because this also talks about time value of money, but it takes a step forward with time value of money. That is, it helps you calculate NPV, net present value, and IRR, internal rate of return. So this reading is more about this investment, or more about decision making with respect to investment. So remember, decision making with respect to investment is a part of corporate finance that we will do in corporate finance, that is project appraisals and capital budgeting. Here they only tell you about the calculation, that how is NPV calculated or IRR is calculated. How is it used will be repeated in, also this all will be repeated in corporate finance again. So how is it used will be a part of corporate finance. Here it is about calculating it. So simply, what is NPV? So simply speaking, NPV is the present value of future cash flows minus, by FCF I do not mean free cash flow, I mean future cash flows. So present value of future cash flows minus initial outlay or initial investment. So you invest into something and then you get return in future. So if you take present value of all future cash flows and you subtract initial investment from it, that is known as NPV. And NPV rule says that is, if anything has a positive NPV, you should take that project, or you should invest into that particular project. Why? Positive NPV means that you are getting something out of it after even considering your opportunity cost. So you are, no matter what is it, it is $1, $100, $1,000, whatever, but you are at least getting something out of it. If NPV is 0, that means you are neither getting anything out of it nor are you losing anything. So even if you take the project or do not take the project, or make the investment or not make the investment, you wouldn't be at a benefit or loss. Your wealth level will not change. Negative NPV means that there are better options available. So you are at a loss on net basis. You are making more investment and getting lesser return compared to what is required. It does not mean you are getting lesser return. It does not mean you are getting negative return. You will still be getting maybe positive return or some value in future, but that is lower than the return which is required. So that means that you are, overall you are losing wealth. If you invest it somewhere else, you can get a better return. So NPV rule says take the project if it has positive NPV and do not take the project if it has negative NPV. That is NPV rule. Having 0 NPV wouldn't make any difference whether you take it or not. So that is NPV rule. That is one way of deciding to invest or not to invest. Another way of deciding to invest or not to invest is to find out the return on that particular investment, or yield on that particular investment. And that yield or return is known as IRR. So IRR is internal rate of return. It tells you the return on the investment, or the internal return or yield on the investment. So IRR is that rate at which your NPV becomes 0. So IRR tells you that what is that particular rate at which NPV will become 0. So IRR is that particular discount rate at which NPV will become 0, simply speaking. So if IRR is high, that means you require a higher return to make NPV 0. If IRR is low, that means you, even with a lower return, your NPV will become 0. You will reach it earlier. So that is IRR. There are some key assumptions of IRR. What is that? So IRR assumes that each cash flow which is being received will be reinvested at IRR. So for example, if IRR is 10%, then it will assume that each cash flow which you are receiving will be reinvested at 10% at the same rate. So for example, if I have a series of cash flows in which I invest $100, then I receive $20 first year, then I receive 25 second year, then 15 third year, and then let's say $30 after that, and so on, whatever the cash flows are. So IRR assumes, IRR will be that rate at which present value of all these items become equal to 100. That is, it is the rate at which NPV becomes 0. Secondly, it assumes that all these cash flows will be reinvested at IRR. So for example, if IRR comes out to be, for example, just a random number, if IRR comes out to be 10%, then it will be based on the assumption that $20 will be reinvested at 10% for future years, whatever years are remaining. 25 will be reinvested at 10%, 15 will be reinvested at 10%. So these are key assumptions. The key assumption is that any cash flow which you receive will be reinvested at the same percentage. And if you are using IRR approach to selecting an investment, you compare IRR with your required rate of return. If IRR is greater than required rate of return, then you go with the investment. Otherwise, you do not go with the investment. So if IRR is greater than required rate of return, you pursue the investment. If IRR is less than required rate of return, then you do not pursue the investment. That is IRR rule. That does not mean that you should not ever pursue an investment with lower IRR. That is IRR rule. That is what IRR methodology or rule tells you about. Now there is another chance or scenario in which maybe there can be a scenario in which NPV and IRR gives you conflicting results. That is, maybe IRR tells you to take the project and NPV tells you not to take the project. Why? Because maybe NPV, for example, there are two projects A and B. Maybe B has higher NPV. As B has a higher NPV, you would want to take B. But maybe A has higher IRR. So that means NPV tells you not to take A, but IRR tells you to take or go for A. Or maybe there can be a scenario in which NPV tells you to take a project because it has a higher NPV, and IRR tells you not to take a project because it has a lower IRR. So maybe there can be conflicting results. For example, if there are two projects A and B, maybe A has high NPV but lower IRR, and maybe B has lower NPV but higher IRR. This can be the case. So remember one key point: whenever there is a conflict between NPV and IRR, you go with NPV. So decision should be taken on the basis of NPV and not IRR. Decision should always be taken on the basis of NPV and not IRR. Why? Because IRR also have some issues with it, or there are some problems with IRR. What are those problems? So one of the key problems with IRR is that, let's say that you have $1,000 to invest and you are investing into a project in which you can only invest 300. Maybe your annual return or IRR that you are getting is very high. Let's say it is 30%. So you are getting 30% of annual return. But what does that 30% mean? That means $90 of return. Yes, so it will become 390. So although IRR is very high, but what is the absolute amount? 90. And this remaining 700 go wasted. So you are not investing 700 into the project. So 700 is lying as cash. Project is only taking 300. So although IRR is very high, NPV will be low. Why? Because in absolute terms, you are only making $90 on this $1,000. So 90 on $1,000 will be a low return, maybe 9% or whatever. So that means that IRR wouldn't take into account the total investment that you are making. That is one problem. Another key problem and something to memorize is that IRR has a specific problem, that is there can be multiple IRRs in one series of cash flow. In one series of cash flow, you can have different IRRs. There can be two IRRs at which NPV becomes 0. And when does this happen? So when we talk about a series of cash flow, there is a conventional series of cash flow and there is unconventional or non-conventional series of cash flow. Conventional means that you have an outflow at t is equals to 0 and then all others are inflows. So you are making investment and then after that you are having all the positive cash flows. This is conventional pattern of cash flows or conventional series of cash flows. Non-conventional is in which outflows can happen again. So there is no fixed pattern. So you can have an outflow, then a positive cash flow inflow, then you can have an outflow, then you can have inflow, then maybe you can have two more outflows. So outflow can happen in future as well. If this is the case, then it is known as non-conventional or unconventional series of cash flow or unconventional pattern. If a series of cash flow is not conventional, then there are chances of multiple IRRs. That is, there can be two IRRs at which NPV becomes 0. So due to these reasons, IRR is not the most suitable criteria to use. IRR should be used in order for evaluation, but decision should be taken based on NPV. So whenever NPV and IRR gives you conflicting results, you go with NPV. Make sure you remember this. Now the question is that how do you actually measure present value or NPV? So far we discussed NVT. In NVT, all the future cash flows had a constant cash flow, let it be 100, 1000 or whatever. And so we could calculate present value by using calculator and by using TVM buttons or TVM row of buttons, time value of money. But now let's say that you have, for example, let's say that you have a pattern in which cash flow is changing. So for example, you have in first year you have $100, in second year you have 120, in third year you have $90 and so on. And you have to calculate present value of these cash flows. So if you have to calculate present value of these cash flows, you cannot use that TVM option from your calculator. So what will you do? You will discount these back separately to present. So you will discount this back, and this back, and then add them up, and then that will give you the present value. So let's say if rate is 10%, you will do 100 divided by 1.1, and then you will add 120 divided by 1.1 square, and then you do 90 divided by 1.1 cube, and this gives you the present value. But there is an option in your calculator which you could use to even to calculate present value of these items. How do you do this? So in your calculator you have an option for cash flow register, CF register or cash flow register. So if you look into so if you look into number 7, on the top of 7 you have data written there. This data is for cash flow register or data for cash flow register. So if you press shift and this is for stats, not data. This will come in later. So look at CF button. You have a CF button. This CF button is cash flow register. So when you press CF, your cash flow register will open and you will see CF0 written on your screen. So first thing that you need to do is you need to clear your cash flow register. And how do you clear it? You use second plus CEC button, because on top of CEC you will see clear work being mentioned. CLR work means clear work. So if you do second and CE, it will remove all the values from cash flow register and keep it as blank. Now you press CF and you go to CF0. So you have opened CF, you have cleared work, and now you need to enter values. So what is CF0? It is the cash flow at time equals to 0. So there is no cash flow at time equals to 0. So you press down arrow key. When you press down arrow key, let's say it is $90 and fifth one is again $90 and then sixth one is $50. So when you press down arrow key, you will see CF1 written on your screen. Sorry, C01 written on your screen. This C01 is first cash flow. So first cash flow is 100. So you press 100 and you press enter. When you press 100 and press enter, this 100 will get stored into C01, and on your screen you will see C01 equals to 100. Now you press down arrow key again. It says F01. F01 means the frequency of first cash flow. So if same cash flow happens again and again, you can just put in the frequency instead of putting it again and again. So here next cash flow is different. So that means frequency is 1. It only appears once. So you set it at, it is already at 1, so you do not need to change it. Again press down arrow key. When you press down arrow key, you say you saw C02. So you press 120 and press enter. This 120 gets stored in C02. Then again down arrow key, F02 is 1. Then again down arrow key, you go to C03. In C03 you put 90. So you press 90 and then you press enter. You put 90, press enter. Again down arrow key, it asks you for F03. F03 is frequency. Now you know that this 90 happens 3 times or thrice. So this means frequency is 3 times. So you press 3, press enter, and your frequency will be set as 3. So you press 3, you press enter, and frequency will be set as 3. Now again down arrow key, it asks you for fourth cash flow, which is after these 3. So after these 3 the cash flow is 50. So you press 50, press enter, and then again F04 is 1. So you have plugged in all the values. If you want to check it, you can use directions, that is down and up, to check the values. So if you look into it from start, if you go on to top by using up arrow key, you will see CF0 being 0, C01 being 100, then 120, then 90 with a frequency of 3, and then 50, which means you have input all the values from here. Now you have to calculate present value. In order to calculate present value, you press this button named as NPV. So you press NPV. When you press NPV, calculator cannot calculate present value until and unless you tell it the rate, that what is the interest rate. So interest rate is 10%. So you put 10, press enter. Again, do not put it as 0.1, put it as 10. Calculator knows that it is in percentage. So interest rate as you press 10, you press enter. Then you press down arrow key again. When you press down arrow key on your screen, you see NPV. So it says NPV equals 0 because it hasn't yet calculated it. Now you press compute button, and when you press compute button, it will compute present value, which is 403.27. In this case, there is no investment. So the value that you get is the present value of future cash flows. If there is an investment, then NPV will give you present value of future cash flows minus investment or initial cash flow. So for example, if I tell you that you invested $370 here, so what is the NPV? In that case, you will need to put in CF0 as minus 370. So in your cash flow register, only thing that you will change is that you will plug in 370. Then you will use plus minus sign. When you use plus minus sign, it will show it as minus 370. You enter it and it gets saved into C0. All else remain be the same. You do not need to update it because it has been stored already. If you want to change it, you can. Then again press NPV, input 10, already there, press down arrow key, compute NPV, and when you compute NPV, it will be 33.278. 33.28. Do not call it 27. It should be, when you round it off, it will be 28. So 33.28 is your NPV. Now let's say that you want to find out what is the IRR. So again, you have an IRR button. You press IRR button and you compute IRR. So press IRR button, then compute, and it will give you an IRR of 13.3%. So your IRR is greater than required rate of return, which means you should go with the investment as per IRR rule. NPV is positive, which means you should go with the investment as per NPV rule. So both of these tell you to go with the investment. But in some scenarios, there can be a mismatch, and in that case, you will go with NPV. As we go ahead, we will do examples on that. So this is how you calculate NPV and IRR, and IRR is that particular discount rate at which NPV becomes 0. If you have to do it from normal calculator, you will have to run iterations. So you will keep on looking for a rate that turns NPV as 0. Otherwise, you can use this method or use your financial calculator. It will run iterations itself and would arrive at the IRR finally. And in Excel, you can simply use the formula equals to IRR and then select the range. This will give you IRR. Which interest rate? 10%. So this is the required rate of return. So whenever you are discounting any cash flows, those cash flows should be discounted from your required rate of return on those particular cash flows. So this should be the required rate of return on that particular investment. So it can be different for investment A and it can be different for investment B. So whenever you are taking a discount rate, that discount rate should be required rate of return on that investment, and it should take any risk associated with that investment into account. If there is any other investment which have different risk profile, then it would have a different discount rate and different required rate. But when you calculate IRR, IRR is not required rate. It is the rate that that project is offering you on offering you. So you compare IRR with this required rate to find out whether the return is higher or not. But then again, as I told you, that maybe IRR looks high, but still it is not valuable. Why? Because maybe NPV is very low because you are not investing at the right time. Secondly, IRR assumes that you will reinvest at the same rate, while in reality you might not be able to reinvest at same rate. Maybe you are only reinvest at 10% and not the IRR per se. So that means IRR has limitations. So it is internal rate of return, very useful, but has its limitations. You cannot assume it to be the real or actual return that you are getting out of the project. This is not the actual return. Actual return can be very different. Like for example, on a bond, you are quoted a yield to maturity. That is IRR. That is, let's say, 10%. It assumes that all the coupon payment that you receive will be reinvested at 10%. But when you go to reinvest it, maybe market rates have fallen and maybe you reinvested at a lower rate and your actual return will be lower. So remember, this yield to maturity, which is IRR, is not actually the actual return that you are making. It has its assumptions or limitations. Actual return can be higher, can be lower. It will depend on future market interest rate. That is, when you receive the coupon payment, then it would depend on the interest rate at that point of investment. So if you receive in coupon payment in future and when you go to invest it, maybe you do not invest it at 10%, maybe you get a rate of 8%, then your actual return will be lower. So these are the assumptions of IRR or yield to maturity. And so remember, IRR is not the actual return that you are making. It is a proxy. IRR is not WACC. So WACC is basically your required rate of return from investment. So for example, if you are making any investment, you are investing, let's say, $100 into an asset. You want to buy asset A. So in order to buy asset A, you have two options. Either you use your money, you put in equity. In that case, if you are putting all of your money, then in that case your required rate of return from that investment would be required rate of return on equity, which is CAPM. Or you have another option, that you invest $70 from your pocket as equity and you invest $30 as, you borrow $30 and as a debt investment. So now you only have a 70% ownership, 30% is financed by someone else. In that scenario, your required rate of return on your equity is RE, for example, and your required rate of return on this debt investment is, or cost of this debt is, RD. So in that case, your final required rate of return from this A wouldn't be required rate of return on equity. It will be a combination of equity and debt. So you will take equity, multiply it by weight, 70 divided by 100, for example, 0.7, and then you will take a cost of debt and multiply it by For example, it is, let's say, after tax cost of debt. So you will take after tax cost of debt and multiply it by its weight. In that case, your WACC would be your required rate of return. So WACC is still in itself is a required rate of. It is required rate of RRR. So I thought you said IRR. No, no, it is RRR, required rate of return. Yes. Yes. So if you are investing with by financing it with debt as well as equity, then WACC becomes your required rate of return. And if you are investing solely with equity, then cost of equity will become your required rate of return. And it remains with the same, because if I have only equity and I calculate WACC would be the same as equity, because weight of debt is 0 and weight of equity is 100. Yes, cost of capital is your required rate of return. So the cost that you have to bear in order to get a return, that is your required rate of return. And that is your WACC, weighted average cost of capital, or cost of equity. So the assumption is whatever your cost is, that is the return that you at least want. Then if IRR is higher, then that is good or better, and if it is lower, that is not good or shouldn't be invested into. That is NPV and IRR. So now you have an example evaluating research and development program using the NPV rule. As an analyst covering the R&D corporation, you are evaluating its research and development program for the current year. Management has announced that it intends to invest $1 million in R&D. Incremental net cash flows are forecasted to be $150,000. Why incremental? Because only the incremental item is your benefit. What you are already getting is not your benefit. You will keep on getting it even if you do not make this investment. So you should look at incremental cash flows, and that we will discuss in detail when we go to corporate finance. $150,000 per year in perpetuity. R&D corporation's opportunity cost of capital is 10%. So which means its required return is 10%, and it is a perpetuity. So now you need to decide whether should you invest into this or not. So they say state whether this program will benefit shareholders or not, as judged by NPV rule. So NPV is present value of future cash flows minus initial investment. So if it is a perpetuity, its present value of future cash flows will simply be payment divided by rate. So it should be 150,000 divided by 0.1. This is the present value of all the future payments from this perpetuity. So that means I will keep on generating 150,000 incremental cash flow forever if I make this investment, and which is equal to 150,000 divided by 0.1, which is 1.5 million. And what is the investment I am making? 1 million. So that means my NPV is 1.5 minus 1, 0.5 million. As my NPV is positive, I should make this investment. So this investment should be made. Now they say that evaluate whether your answer to part 1 changes if R&D corporation's opportunity cost of capital is 15%. If it is 15%, this number of present value will change. So it will then be 1.5 million. It will then be 150,000 divided by 0.15, and when you divide it by 0.15, it will be 1 million. So that means now there is no benefit, no loss. So that means this project is actually giving you nothing. If it is important for maybe branding or marketing, whatever, or expansion point of view, you should go for it. If it is not important, do not get into its hassle. It is not giving you any positive return. 15% is IRR. Yes, 15% is IRR, because this is the point at which your NPV becomes 0 or your PV becomes equal to initial investment. Evaluating, again moving on, in the previous R&D corporation example, initial outlay is 1 million and program's cash flows are 150,000 in perpetuity. Now you are interested in determining program's internal rate of return, IRR. So what is IRR? IRR is simply 15%. How do you get it? So you know that IRR is the point at which NPV becomes equal to 0. What is NPV? NPV is present value of future cash flows minus initial investment. This means difference should become 0. By difference becoming 0 means present value of future cash flows should be equal to investment. And this means what is the present value of future cash flows? It is 150,000 divided by 0.1. Sorry, not 0.1. This is something that we have to calculate. So R is something that we have to calculate. Rate. Discount rate at which this becomes equal to investment. So present value is 150,000 divided by R, and we need to equate it to 1 million. So the rate at which these two become equal, that is your IRR. So it will be 150,000 divided by 1 million, and when you do this you get 15%. So that means at 15% NPV becomes 0, and hence 15% is IRR. So remember, IRR is that rate at which NPV becomes 0, and NPV rule means that take any project which gives you a positive NPV. So another example, what is NPV? So calculated using calculator, using cash flow register on calculator, but first remember to clear work in CF. So first press CF, then second, and then clear work, so that it removes all the values. What's the answer? 1.8 million approximately. 1.76 million. So simply you plug in minus 13 as CF0, then you plug in 3, and then you set its frequency as 4, and then you move on to C02, and you plug in C02 as 10 million. And then when you calculate NPV, it asks you for interest rate, and interest rate is 12%. And so you plug in 12 in interest rate and you calculate the NPV, which is coming out to be 1.8 million. And if you have to calculate IRR, what is IRR? 16.42%. So again, NPV is positive, which means you should take the project. IRR is greater than return appropriate discount rate or return required. So this means you should take the project. But if these two give you a conflicting result, then you should go with NPV. So again, we discuss what are the problems with IRR. Problems with IRR are, or NPV and IRR rules rank projects differently when the size or scale of the project differs. For example, your total project for one of your projects is taking $1,000 of investment, and another is taking $200, $300, $400 of investment. So if size or scale differs, then these two can give you conflicting result, or the timing of the project's cash flows differ. In that case, two of the projects can give you different results. And here they have given an example that, for example, if you invest 10,000, uh, invest 10,000 and you get a first cash flow of 15,000, and then no cash flows in year 2 or year 3, then your IRR is 50%, which is very high. So you looks like you should take it. Why? Because D has a IRR of 28. So that means IRR tells you to take A, but NPV of A is 3.9 million approximately, which is lower than 6.8 million. So NPV tells you to take B. Why? Because the size of cash flows in these two is different, due to which NPV and IRR is given, and timing is also different, due to which NPV and IRR are giving conflicting results. So in this case, you should go for higher NPV. So you should take D. Although A is giving you a better IRR, but you should go for D. Why? Because it is giving you a higher NPV. Although it is giving you a cash flow after third year, but even after that's why annual rate is lower, but even after third year it is giving you a high value. While if you receive it in first year and then you wait for next 2 years and do nothing, then that is again a lower value for today. Yes, exactly. So this is only relevant when you are taking one of the two projects. If you can take both, if you have sufficient capital to take both and both can be taken, then you should take even A and D, because both have positive NPV. Otherwise, if one of these needs to be taken, if you have limited capital, one of these needs to be taken, then you take the higher NPV, D. So that is about IRR and your NPV based on your on that how to calculate IRR and NPV using your calculator. Its use would come in corporate finance topic, where we would discuss different scenarios in which you will be selecting different projects. With moving on forward with the NPV, after NPV and IRR, we have portfolio return measurement. That how do you measure return of portfolio? So whenever you are, for example, you are an investor, you have given your money to a portfolio manager. Now you want to see whether that portfolio manager is performing good or performing well or not. How do you see it? You want to see, you want to check the return, or you want to calculate the return. So when you calculate the return, there are two ways in which you can calculate return: time weighted rate of return, TWRR, and money weighted rate of return, which is MWRR. So you can either calculate time weighted return or you can calculate money weighted return. Key point to note is that time weighted return is simply your annual compound return, which is your geometric mean. Time weighted return is simply your annual return, which is your geometric mean, compounded annual return. Money weighted return is your IRR, internal rate of return. And what is the difference between these two? For example, if I tell you, you invested $100 today, its value increased to $110 in first year, then its value increased to 100 and, for example, $15 in second year. And I ask you, what is your annual return? What is your TWRR, time weighted rate of return? So for time weighted rate of return, what you do is that you only look at these values, that what was the value at the start and what was it at the end. And maybe you bought another share at this point of time, but then again, for even for that share, you will calculate return based on the value at which it was bought. So when you are calculating time weighted return or geometric mean, you look at only the values, that how much has the value changed. But when you look at money weighted return, you are not concerned about annual return, you are concerned about cash flows, that when is the cash flow happening, when did you buy it, when did you sell it. So where did the cash flow happen? So in that case, cash flow would have happened here, that is, you have invested money. First year, although it increased in value, you did not sell it. Cash flow will happen at the second year when you actually sell it, positive cash flow or inflow. So if you calculate your return using cash flows, which is IRR, that is known as money weighted return. And if you calculate return based on values, that is geometric mean, that is time weighted return. So that means in time weighted return will not be impacted by timing of cash flows. So it wouldn't take into account timing of cash flows. It wouldn't be impacted by timing of cash flows. So timing of cash flows wouldn't matter. If you invest today, after 1 year or whatever, whenever you are investing, that timing is not taken into consideration. That when did you actually buy or when did you actually sell, that is not taken into consideration. Money weighted return will actually consider timing of cash flows, that when was the investment made or when was it withdrawn. So there can be two scenarios with you being investor. One of the scenarios is that you have given $1,000 to portfolio manager, and now you tell him that it's your choice whenever you want to buy it or whenever you want to sell. You have $1,000 for next 2 years. Buy at any point of time, buy, sell at any point of time. That means portfolio manager will decide timing of cash flow. And if portfolio manager is deciding timing of cash flow, then he should be accountable for taking wrong decisions at the wrong timing, because he has money for the whole period and he will decide. If he needs more money, he would come to you and ask for more money. He needs to take the timing of cash flow. On the other hand, there can be another case in which I decide when to invest. So I give $500 today. After 6 months, I give 500 more to invest 500 more. Now timing is being decided by me and not portfolio manager. In that case, portfolio manager should not be held accountable, or his performance should not be judged based on the timing. Why? Because I as an investor is deciding the timing. So that is how the difference comes in, or these different methods are used. So money weighted return should be used when investment manager has control over cash inflows and outflows. In that case, he is deciding when to invest and when not to invest. If he is deciding that, then this timing should be taken into consideration when analyzing his performance, and so money weighted should be used. If investor has control over inflows and outflows, then portfolio manager is not taking a decision based on for inflows and for timing, and so he should not be judged on the timing, and so a time weighted return should be used. So remember, if investor has control over inflows and outflows, time weighted return is used. If portfolio manager has control over inflows and outflows, money weighted return is used, because money weighted return will judge the performance including the timing into account. Time weighted would judge the performance excluding the timing into account, and timing plays a significant role in the portfolio management, because if you know something is going up but you do not have money as of today and you are investing after 6 months, then you wouldn't get that return. So now the question is that how do we actually calculate it, money weighted or time weighted return? So we will do it through an example. So first let's do money weighted and then time weighted. To illustrate the money weighted return, consider an investment that covers a 2-year horizon. At t is equals to 0, investor buys one share at $200. So that means if I have to make a timeline, at t is equals to 0, he is buying a share at 200. I am calculating money weighted. Money weighted return is based on cash flows. So that means if I am buying something for 200, it is an outflow. So that means first cash flow is minus 200. At time t is equals to 1, he purchases an additional share at 225. So that means now value has increased to 225. So that means there is a 12.5% return. But I wouldn't take that return into account. Why? Because I am only concerned about cash flows and not return. So it tells me that t is equals to 1. He purchased an additional share at 225, which means another outflow of 225. So t is equals to 1 minus 225. So remember, I wouldn't take it as positive, or I wouldn't take it as calculate it as a return. I will only calculate the outflow. Inflow and outflow will be recorded. At the end of year 2, he sells both shares for 235. When you sell it, that is an inflow. So that means one share for 235 and another share for 235 inflows. During both years, stock pays a per share dividend of $5. So that means first year I had one share, it paid an inflow of $5, dividend of $5. Then in second year I had two shares. So each of them would have paid a dividend of $5. So that means $5 from first one and $5 from second one. So these are my total cash flows, and they have told you that dividend is not reinvested. That means this dividend is just taken as an inflow and put in pocket. This is not reinvested. That means these are the only cash flows. Had you reinvested it, then it wouldn't have been taken as a cash inflow. You would have removed it from here, and when you had taken it out at second year, then it would have been gone. It would have gone as an inflow. Currently, this inflow happened at first year because you took out dividend and put it in pocket. So that means total outflows will be minus 200, minus 220, and 470 plus 10, 480. So now you have to calculate money weighted return. Money weighted return is IRR. So how do you calculate IRR? You calculate IRR using your cash flow register. So go to your cash flow register, clear your work, and then put these numbers in. Nine 9.39%. So this is your IRR, and this IRR is known as money weighted rate of return. So simply what you did was that you took the cash flows, outflow, then outflows and inflows, then outflows and inflows. So you only took cash flows, and based on those cash flows you calculated IRR. That IRR is known as money weighted rate of return, and MWRR, and that is 9.39%. Remember, this is money weighted rate of return, and when do we use it? You should use it when portfolio manager controls the inflows and outflows. Then you should use MWRR. Now next is that using the same example, calculate time weighted rate of return. So remember, in time weighted rate of return, we are not concerned about cash flows. We are rather concerned about the return that we are getting, whatever return we are getting. So I will not take it as positive, negative, whatever. I will just calculate return. So I know that at time t is equals to 0, portfolio manager bought a stock which was valued at $200. At the end of first year, its value had increased to $225, and it paid me a dividend of $5. That means its value had increased to $230. So what is the return that he made for me in the first year? Return that he made for me in first year is 230 divided by 200 minus 1, which is 15%. So that means in first year he made me a return of 15%. 230 divided by 200 minus 1, 15%. Then in second year, now I am starting again. So first year is done. I will just remove it all. So first year is done. In first year, the price increased to 225, and I got a dividend of 5. So my total was 230, and 230 divided by 200 minus 1 is 15%, which means I've got a return of 15%. Now first year is done. Now I will talk about second year. In second year, he bought another share. So that means now he is keeping 2 shares of the same asset. And what is the price of one? 225. At the end of first year, one of these shares is priced at 225. So price for 2 shares is $450. So 225 one share, 225 another share. So that means total amount that he is investing is $450. That means total value of portfolio at the end of first year is $450. He is not investing $5. That is gone. The total value of portfolio at the end of first year is $450. Now I am told that at the end of second year, the value has increased to $235 per share. So that means that at the end it will be 235 for this one and 235 for this one, right? And they have told me that in second year again I received a dividend. That dividend is $5 per share. So that means I received an additional return of 5 on first year and then additional return of 5 on second year. So that means he invested $450 and at the end of second year that $450 actually became 470 plus 10, $480. So that means he invested 450 in first year and that became at the end of first year and that became 480 at the end of second year. So what is the return that he is getting in second year? It is 480 divided by 450 minus 1. And for second year the return would be 480 divided by 450 minus 1. It is 6.767%. So that means in second year he made a return of 6.67%. So now in this case I am not concerned about the timing. When did cash flow happen? I am only concerned about what was the value at start, what was the value of end of first year. Then next I did another, then I removed everything and then I found out what was the value at the start of one and what was the value at year second, at the end of second year. So that tells me that in first year he made a 15% return, in second year he made a 6.67% return. And what is the annual return? I calculate annual return using geometric mean. Geometric mean is 1 plus R1 into 1 plus R2 into 1 plus R3 and you continue to do this till you arrive at 1 plus Rn and then you take its, so not, you take its square root, that is taking it to the power of 1 divided by n, not the square root, actually root to the power of n. So you take its root to take it to the power of 1 divided by n and then you subtract 1 minus 1. This is your geometric mean, or this is the formula for geometric mean. You can use this formula to calculate time weighted annual return. How do I do this? So in this case it will be first year R1 is 15%. So 1 plus R1 1.15. Then R2 is 6.67. So multiplied by 1.0667. And there is nothing after that. So I take it to the power of 1 divided by 2 and I subtract 1. So when you do this, answer should be 1.15 multiplied by 1.0617 to the power of 0.5 minus 1, and that is 10.49% or 10.5%. So your answer is 10.5%. This is your TWRR, time weighted rate of return. So remember the difference between these two and you should be able to calculate difference of these two. When you do it using your calculator, how do you put in power? So in order to put in power, you have a button as y to the power x. So on your calculator you have a button y to the power x. So for example, if you want to calculate 10 to the power 3 or 10 to the power, let's say 5, what you simply do is you press 10, you press this yx button and then you press 5 and then you press equal to, and this will give you the 10 to the power 5, which is 100,000. So use this yx button to put in power. If you want to put it as 1 divided by 2, then you press whatever the number is and then you use this button and put power as 0.5. So this is the button that you use to put the power. Any problem or confusion up till here in time weighted rate of return? So just a recap of money weighted and time weighted. Money weighted rate of return is actually your IRR. As it is IRR, it means it is dependent on cash flow timing, and so it should be used if portfolio manager controls the timing of cash flows. TWRR is your geometric mean. It should be used when investor controls timing. It is based on value and not cash flows. So this is the difference between MWRR and TWRR, time weighted rate of return and money weighted rate of return. and this is how you calculate it. This is very important to remember because you would see questions, or you may see questions in your practice question on this TWRR and MWRR. So make sure you are able to calculate it. One last topic for today is money market yields. So before we discuss money market yields, you should know what money market is. So there are two types of markets with respect to fixed income instruments: capital market and money market. So an instrument can have a maturity of greater than 1 year, or can have a time to maturity of less than 1 year. So if it has a maturity of greater than 1 year, it is known as capital market instrument. These are long term. And if it has a maturity of less than 1 year, it is known as money market instrument. They are short term. But generally in market, when you are talking to anyone, they would refer to capital markets as money market as well. So whenever they talk about 5-year instrument, they would call it a money market instrument. But theoretically, or based on the theory, or based on the finance, or in this course, money market, remember, would mean short term instrument less than 1 year, and capital market would mean greater than 1 year, or long term instrument. These two are different terminologies in your curriculum or with respect to theory. Practically, money market is the word used for capital market as well as money market. So now in money market, there are some conventions that are used for calculations. So what are those actually? What are those conventions? So there are some specific types of yield that are used. So if you go to someone and ask what is the return on a bond, or return on a money market or treasury security or whatever, he wouldn't tell you the actual return or effective annual return. He would tell you some yield, because that is the convention used in market. He may tell you bank discount yield, he may tell you money market yield, he may tell you bond equivalent yield or whatever. So these are some terms which are used. You do not always get the effective return. The instruments are not quoted on effective return. Instruments are quoted on these yields: bank discount, money market, bond equivalent yield. Then you can convert it into effective annual return for your use or for your comparisons. Now starting with HPY, before we discuss these three, first let's discuss HPY. We have already discussed effective annual yield. You know how to calculate effective annual return. That is the effective annual yield. That is done. So first we'll discuss HPY and then these. HPY, holding period yield, or HPR, another name for it, holding period return, means the total return over a period of time. So for example, if I tell you that you make an investment of $100 today and it becomes $110 after 1 year, what is the return? 10%. If I tell you that it becomes 121 after 2 years, annual return is still 10%. So if you are giving annual yield or annual return, that is 10%. But if you are asked HPY, holding period yield, or HPR, that is the simple return over the whole holding period. So HPR or HPY would be 21%. It will be final value divided by initial value minus 1, 21%. Let it be for 2 years, let it be for 5 years, let it be for 2 months, 6 months, or whatever period. It is the simple return over that particular period, excluding compounding, annual, everything. This is what HPY is. So HPY is the simplest form of return. So these two are done. Now what is bank discount yield? So bank discount yield has a specific formula with which it is calculated, and this is the yield on which T-bills or treasury bills are quoted on. So if you find out the yield on a treasury bill, the yield that they quote it on is bank discount yield. It is not the effective annual return. Maybe you make some other return, and if you convert it into annual return, this is not annual return, that is discount yield. And how do you calculate discount yield? So let's say that you have a 90-day T-bill. When you buy it, you will buy it for some price. Let's say that you are buying it for $97 or $97. And when this is for 90 days, when 90 days end, you will receive back the par value or maturity amount. Let's say par value is Par value is also known as face value, also only known as par. So when you receive, or maturity value, so when it matures and you receive the par value, let's say that par value is 100. So that means you are getting a discount of $3 today. And that's why you will invest. Why? Because if you are getting 97 again after 3 months, why would you want to invest? You want to receive a higher amount, or whatever the maturity value is, you want to have a value lower than that. That's why you invest. So bank discount yield. So if I ask you what is your return, you will say my return is 3 divided by 97. My holding period return is 3 divided by 97, which means 3 divided by 97, which means a return of 3.09%. And if I ask you that what will be your annual effective return, you can just annualize it by multiplying it by approximately 4, or multiply it to the power of 1.0309 to the power 4, or an approximation would be just multiply it by 4, right? So this is 3 month, and then 12 month would be 1.0309 to the power of 4. That will be my annualized return, and -1. If you do -1, that will give you your return. So that is your return on this instrument. But when you go to buy it, or when you look into the market, they do not tell you the actual return that you are getting. They tell you a specific kind of return which is calculated using a specific formula. So they tell you bank discount yield. What is bank discount yield? Bank discount yield is discount that you are getting divided by face value multiplied by 360 divided by time period, that is 90 days. So if I have to calculate bank discount yield on this instrument, my discount is $3, face value is 100, 360 for years, for number of days in year, divided by T, which is 90. This will be the bank discount yield, and if you calculate it, it will be very different from the actual return that you are getting. But the convention in market is that you quote it on the bank discount yield. Now this bank discount yield have two major problems with it. What are those two major problems? One of the problems is that it divides discount with face value, future value. While if you are calculating return, your return should be divided by investment and not the future value. So first key you can say problem is that it divides it by face value, future value, not by investment, while return is calculated by dividing the profit by, or gain by, investment. So that is a problem or issue with it. Another issue is it assumes that there are 360 days in here, while actually there are 365 days. So that is another issue with this yield. But nevertheless, this is the convention that have been used throughout, and this is the convention that is used now. So you take bank discount yield and then you convert it in effective annual yield for your use, or for comparison with non-treasury instruments. So remember these two weaknesses. Maybe you see it in practice questions. So remember the two weaknesses. Then you have money market yield. So what is money market yield? Money market yield adjusts for one of these weaknesses. So instead of taking face value, money market yield takes investment, that is $97, or your price, you can say, which is $97. So it has corrected for one of these weaknesses or issues, but still it takes 360 days as number of days in year. So one is corrected, one problem is corrected, one still remains be there in money market yield. Or also I can write money market yield as, if I am taking gain and dividing gain by initial investment, then that is my HPY. HPY is simply your total profit divided by initial investment. And so it means that I am taking kind of HPY and then adjusting it for period of time to get the money market yield. So you can say it is HPY into 360 divided by time as well. This is money market yield. Any problem so far? There is one other type of yield that you should know, which is bond equivalent yield. Simply remember the formula, it is 2 into semi-annual yield. So if you have semi-annual rate of return and if you multiply it by 2, that yield is known as bond equivalent yield. So for example, if I invested 100 and if I got 110 at the end, this is the 10% return that I have received on in 1 year. If I ask you that had I been given a return as 6 months, what would have been my yield or what would have been my return in 6 months time? And if you calculate that yield, like for example, you put in future value as 110, you put in present value as PV, payment as 0, you put in present value as minus 100, future value as 110, and you put, for example, number of period as 2, number of periods are put as 2, and you compute IY. IY will come out to be, 2 periods in this year, minus 100 PV, 0 PMT, 110 FP. And if I compute IY, it comes out to be 4.88%. That means if this return is semi-annually compounded, then the rate should be then 6-month rate would be 4.88%. And if I now multiply this semi-annual yield by 2, that will be my bond equivalent yield, 9.76%. So simply it is semi-annual yield multiplied by 2. If you are given it as it is, you just multiply it by 2. If it is not given, you can simply calculate it using your calculator. So put in an as 2, future value, value at the end of the year, present value, value at the start of the year, and payment as 0, and you compute IY, and that IY is your semi-annual yield for the half year, and then you multiply it by 2 and get the bond equivalent yield. So remember the concept that bond equivalent yield is 2 into semi-annual yield. Let's just do this question for all. 90-day T-bill is purchased for 997.40. That means its price as of today is 997.40. Time to expiration is 90 days. What are the bank discount yield, holding period yield, money market yield? Remember, if you are not told the face value would be the nearest 100 or 1000. So in this case, face value would be 1000. So now you have to calculate bank discount yield. Bank discount yield is discount divided by face value multiplied by 360 divided by T or time period. So discount is 1000 minus 997.4, which means 2.6, divided by face value is 1000 multiplied by 360 divided by time is 90. And when you do this, you will get an answer of 1.04%. So that means bank discount yield is 1.04%. So remember, bank discount yield does not mean that you calculate the return. It is not the actual return. It is a specific kind of yield calculated by using a specific formula, and you can only calculate it using this formula. If you make any deviation in formula, that wouldn't be bank discount yield. And if you have to calculate holding period yield, so simply what you are getting in future 1000, what you are paying today 997. So 1000 divided by 997.4 minus 1, which is 0.2607%. So this is your HPY. If you have to calculate money market yield, it is discount divided by price, which is the same as HPY, multiplied by 360 divided by time. So it should be discount, again 2.6 divided by 90 multiplied by 360 divided by sorry, this is not 90, this is 2.6 divided by price. Price is 997.4. And when you do 2.6 divided by 997.4 multiplied by 360 divided by 90, it gives you approximately 1.0428% or 0.427%. So that is money market yields. If you have to calculate effective annual yield, you already know how to do this. So your future value is 1000, present value is 997.4. So 1000 divided by 997.4, and if I do so minus 1, then it will be, the total amount would be 1000 divided by 997.4 minus 1. It comes out to be 0.26067%, and this is the return for 90 days. Then if I have to annualize it, I can multiply it simply by 365 divided by 90, and that should give me the divided by 90 multiplied by 365. That should give me the annual yield, whatever the number comes out to be. So ignore maybe this calculation, go with this calculation. That is what you are getting. Sorry, yeah, 1000 divided by 997.4 minus 1, which is your profit, and it comes out to be 1000 divided by 997.4 minus 1 to 7. So this is your profit which you are getting. Then you add that profit, or you can use this, it will be a proxy approximate number. Or if you do not want to use this approximate number, you want to calculate actual effective yield, what you do is you do 1 plus this rate. So this rate plus 1, and take it to the power of 365 divided by 90, to the power 365 divided by 90, and that should give you your yield, which is 1.010614%. So this is the accurate method. Go with this one. This will give you an approximation, so better is go with the compounding, or this method, because that wouldn't take compounding into account. So go with this route and method, and this will give you a yield of 1.010614%. So this is how you calculate effective annual yield. So let's end it here.